Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Everybody, please thumbs up, like and share the show. Please go to X. That is, we are streaming there at Santita J, at Santita J. Please become part of my family there and the Santita Jackson and Friends page on Facebook. That is the only place where I can accept friends, everybody. Please, we're streaming there right now. I want you to be part of the conversation with the Morning Stars and the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Look, Facebook keeps reaching out to me. They said, you're getting a lot of traction. We need you to get your audience over to YouTube. So please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Help me out, everybody, and like and subscribe there. Let's get these algorithms up so that we can continue to grow the show. And I thank you for all that you have done to grow the show thus far. You're just really such blessings, everybody. And so let's talk about what is, they say that the bombs you drop overseas explode at home. Dr. King warned us about that. And here we are. You had the former president of the United States, or should I say a past president, who had been a general, Dwight D. Eisenhower. He warned us about, really the military industrial complex trumping the civilian experience in the United States. And here we are. He said, the impacts will be not only material, but spiritual. And he was going to call it the military industrial congressional complex, but his speechwriters told him, take that out. That's a little bit too incendiary. So let's talk about the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. Now, it has already been reported. It has been reported that many of our police forces around the country are training in Israel, right? And some of them come over here to train. So there's a lot of exchange. But when we see what the IDF are doing in Gaza and the West Bank now, it is concerning, right? So now we see that with all of the unrest around Gaza, the protests, the demonstrations, the encampments at the colleges, the pushback that we're seeing coming from people who are the disruptors, the counter protesters are really hired guns. We're beginning to see, and so let's really look at what it means to have, no one should violate any house of worship. I don't care where it is. And so you have some Jewish people in Los Angeles who said, I feel unsafe. Okay, so they feel unsafe. And there's a proposal before the LA City Council that has been paused, at least temporarily, that would have former IDF soldiers along with some former American soldiers. They're part of a group that would patrol our streets in Los Angeles. What do you make of that? This has been ongoing. This has been something that's been on the table since the beginning of July. And it was introduced by council members, LA City Council members Katie Yaroslavsky and Bob Blumenfield. And this proposed funding, $1 million, follows attacks by Zionists on Palestine solidarity activists. That is the name of the group. However, the successful mobilization of anti-Zionist forces, according to this report, led the city council to delay their vote on the motion. And so let's talk about it. Of course, with Dwight McKee, senior advisor to Cornel West, in his presidential bid, we've got attorney Linda Bernard, who is a commissioner with the Department of Police in Detroit. And she's a civil rights lawyer as well. But let's start with you. And I want you to give us the foundation for this. Phyllis Bennis, the director of New Internationalism, this project at the Institute for Policy Studies, brilliant author, brilliant thinker. And whenever we talk about really international issues, not just issues in the Middle East, my father always wants to know if I've spoken with you to get some perspective. Well, I mean, really, to get some perspective. Our respect for you is just that great. And it's kind of ironic because we're talking about what happened with Sonia Massey, this young Black woman, 36 years of age, who was shot 3 times by a police officer who had been kicked out of the Army, Phyllis, in the United States. And he told her he was going to shoot her. And he shot her in her face. 3 times, killing her. And she called because she was reporting a prowler outside of her home, but they thought the violence was in her home. And so when you've got all of this going on with I mean, this it makes you nervous. My brother, Congressman Jonathan Jackson, was stopped by the police. He was opening up a group of phone stores, and even with his MBA from Kellogg, which is one of the top MBA programs in the world, and he's wearing his suit, and and the police cuffed him, put him in the back of the car along with his business partner, and his business partner became very agitated, scared to death, because when you get in the back of the car, when you're put there, you don't know if you're going to come out alive, Phyllis. And he kept saying, do you know who this is? And Jonathan said, be quiet. Doesn't matter who my daddy is. This happens to us routinely. Let this play out. And Jonathan said, all I kept thinking was, I've got a wife, I've got children, I got my parents, I got my siblings. I hope I see them again. And when they finally, after about an hour or so, ran his information, they said, why didn't you tell us who you are? We're going to let you go. He said, no, I'm going to stay in this car. You're going to charge me with something. Because this happens to everybody all the time. My daddy shouldn't matter to you. Now, so you're going to charge me. And that really sparked his activism on another level, Phyllis Bennis. But this happens to everybody. The implications of this to me are unsettling. So I'd like to hear from you, because when I was talking with you about it, you were like, what? Talk to me.
Well, Santita, thank you for that introduction and for the story of what happened to Jonathan and your family and the entire Black community in this country. And that's not unrelated to what we're seeing playing out in Los Angeles. There's a couple of different issues here. One is the notion of the broad principle of what's at stake here, where we're seeing members of the Los Angeles City Council talking about hiring private armed guards, accountable, as far as we can tell, to no one, who include former members of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and former members of the US military, who are trained as military people in the case of the Israeli forces, they are trained to carry out a military occupation based on an apartheid system inside Israel, in the occupied West Bank, in occupied East Jerusalem, and the occupied Gaza Strip. So the point is not to say that it takes Israeli soldiers to teach US police how to oppress Black people or how to beat up people that they are suspicious of for other reasons, because the US police clearly can do that very well on their own. The problem is the collaboration between police forces, all of whom are known for racism, for discriminatory use of violence, and for a reliance on violence as the first response. In all these cases, among the Israeli forces, in the military, the US military certainly, and US police. So the notion that they are collaborating with each other, training each other's forces, is a very dangerous one as a principle. Then there's the question of who these particular people are, the lack of accountability, all of that. But the other thing that's going on here that gets lost in this discussion, I'm afraid, is what was actually going on that led to all of this. This was not an attack on Jewish worshipers because they were Jews. This was not an anti-Semitic anything. This was a protest, a peaceful protest, noisy and disruptive, yes, a peaceful protest outside a building that happened to be a synagogue, but was being used as a sales opportunity by a major real estate company that represented housing units in 8 separate illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem that are being marketed to people in the United States. Their primary audience is American Jews who want to buy a second home or to move either to Israel. They also have Israeli homes that they're selling, but the protest focused on the fact that they were selling homes in 8 separate illegal settlements in the West Bank. to join the existing 750,000 illegal Israeli settlers in those settlements across the West Bank, who are all violating international law every morning simply by getting out of bed because their homes are built on illegally expropriated land. That's what the protest was about. So the notion that this is somehow being described in the media by the city council, whatever, as a protest against Jews, it was coincidence. We don't even know if everybody inside was Jewish. That wasn't a requirement. You don't have to be Jewish to buy one of these homes. You have to be not a Palestinian, but you don't have to necessarily be Jewish. We don't know who the people were who were inside. The synagogue was not itself the target of the protest. The protest was what was going on inside, which was not about prayers, was about continuing illegal settlement actions in the occupied West Bank, something that just 2 weeks ago, the International Court of Justice just ruled again in an opinion issued at the request of the entire UN General Assembly, that all Israeli settlement activities must stop and that the existing settlers must be evacuated. That was the first time that the United Nations, the High Court, the highest court in the world, the International Court of Justice, ruled that the occupation itself is illegal and that the settlers must be evacuated. So instead, you have these real estate companies out selling more homes to Americans to go buy land in the occupied West Bank. So that's the framework in which this is going on. So we have the intersection of racism and US foreign policy. We have the intersection of claims of anti-Semitism that are false with the erasing of the real issues that are at stake among the people who are protesting what was going on inside that building.
Well, because Phyllis Bennis, the corporate media are not reporting it that way.
No, they're not.
Okay,
No,
explain.
Well, I think that what we're seeing is part of a broader process of something that has been going on for some years now, of using false claims of anti-Semitism as a weapon, weaponizing the claim of anti-Semitism to undermine the movement that has become so powerful of people who are fighting for Palestinian rights, demanding an immediate and lasting permanent ceasefire in Gaza, demanding an end to US arms transfers to Israel, and demanding the provision of massive amounts of immediate humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza, who are facing now not only death by bombs and tank attacks and ground attacks, but are starving. Starvation is now rampant across Gaza, and that includes the expansion of waterborne diseases that have long been non-existent in that whole region, including in Gaza, that are now back because there is no access to clean water. So you have kids that are facing diarrheal diseases, hepatitis, and now there's a polio outbreak. So all of this is the target of a massive improving and expanding movement that is demanding a change in US policy, that instead of enabling that genocide by providing all the weapons needed and the political and diplomatic protection, so that Israeli leaders led by Prime Minister Netanyahu can assume they will never be held accountable for these crimes because the United States government will protect them. A movement challenging that is now being attacked by being called anti-Semitic, including people like me, Jews who are part of that movement. Jewish Voice for Peace is now twice the size it was before the recent escalations in Gaza that began last October. It's an organization of 40,000 people with hundreds and hundreds of rabbis within its rabbinical council. 400 of them got arrested this past week in Congress, sitting on the floor of the Cannon office building with their red T-shirts saying on one side, "Not in our name," and on the other side, "Jews say stop arming Israel," with I think it was about 25 or 30 of the rabbis inside the circle wearing their white rabbinical collars. This is what we're dealing with today. All of us are being accused of anti-Semitism because we are criticizing and demanding an end to US support for the Israeli government.
We're talking with Phyllis Bennett, Institute for Policy Studies, their director of the New Internationalism Project, about this proposal before the LA City Council that's been paused, but it's still there, for former IDF soldiers, Israeli Defense Force soldiers, and former American soldiers to be a part of a group that would patrol the streets of Los Angeles, well, Jewish areas. What would that look like? I mean, because we're dealing with, the militarization of the country. And when you have police officers who are not connected to a community, right? Uh, you're othered, Phyllis
But
Bennett.
this is not even police officers that we're talking about.
These are soldiers.
These are soldiers, and
Real
they're
soldiers.
privately.
Hold on, Attorney Bernard. Hold on.
Sorry.
Wait.
I just to finish, they're privately. If this happened, if this proposal goes through, they would be privately paid by this grant from the city council to a private organization with no public accountability. So the work that Linda Bernard and so many other people work on for police accountability simply wouldn't apply, because they're not sworn police officers. They're private guards accountable to no one. That's incredibly dangerous.
I'd like to say that it's also dangerous to have people that are real soldiers that are used to using huge guns, big bombs, all sorts of armament and everything, patrolling a city in the United States of America. First of all, they have no business here. Secondly, in my opinion, the city of Los Angeles and the state of California will be sued unbelievably as a result of this, because these people are used to using deadly force every day. They're in a war zone right now. They're used to, these are weapons really of war. And this is what they are used to, and this is what they're how they kill people. The very thought of having real soldiers in military garb marching down any city in America is outrageous. If we're going to have soldiers on our streets, they will be American soldiers, or i.e. National Guard. It will not be from Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, or any place else. It's totally unacceptable. And to my knowledge, Phyllis, and you may know better than I, there's no place in the world that this exists, where you can take soldiers from a different country and they, quote, patrol neighborhoods or areas of a sovereign nation and a sovereign city.
I think that it is, if not the only place, it's one of. But I think one of the things that it speaks to is this very close relationship at the official level between the United States and Israel, so that people in the United States, US citizens, can go to Israel, whether they become Israeli citizens or not. They can fight in the Israeli military, not lose their citizenship in the United States, not have that be a problem in any way, unlike, for example, South Africa, which recently passed a law making it illegal for a South African citizen to go and join the Israeli military and fight in the Israeli military, because some white South Africans were doing exactly that. They were going from South Africa to Israel to join the IDF, and the South Africans were having none of it and made it illegal. The United States might take a lesson from that. But as of now, this is not something that is historically a problem. These are not, we should be clear, these are not, as I understand the proposal, these are not active duty or even reserve soldiers from Israel. These are former IDF soldiers, but that means they were trained by the IDF in how to be an occupying army.
On the streets of Los Angeles. I
My
mean, I don't care.
my
I don't care.
neighborhood. That's where I went to high school, was that exact Pico Robertson neighborhood in Los Angeles. And
What is the neighborhood like? Describe it for us.
It's I haven't been there in a little while, but it's historically a kind of middle and lower middle class neighborhood, commercial districts, a significant Jewish population historically. Now I think it's more Latino. When I was going to high school there, it was more Jewish and Black. I think now it's more Latino and Black and some Jewish. It's not a particularly wealthy area, but it's historically within Los Angeles one of the centers of Jewish commercial life. Lots of shops, lots of restaurants, delis that cater particularly to the large Jewish community there. And a number of synagogues, I don't know, 5 or 6 maybe, small ones. But this is a there's nothing unusual about this neighborhood in Los Angeles. The notion that this would be a part of LA that is now patrolled by former Israeli soldiers, I find just shocking, appalling. I don't know what words to use.
Well, why is it shocking and appalling?
Well, it's only particularly that to me because that was the neighborhood I grew up in.
Well, yeah. There's that.
The idea of it is
Because it
shocking.
doesn't exist anywhere in America that I'm aware of.
Exactly. Lynn's point is exactly right.
We have local police, our own police departments that police our cities and our communities.
There's a reason that we require police to live in the neighborhoods they work in. So there's some kind of accountability. This is the opposite of that.
Dwight McKee, what are your thoughts?
Well, I always talk about America really being a European construct, and this demonstrates that at a different kind of level. Is it would be unthinkable for one of the African countries to send troops over here to protect black citizens from the police. By the time they got stepped off the boat, they'd be shot and war would be declared upon the country. The only place that this right now is happening is in Haiti, where the African country has taken upon itself through the encouragement of Biden to go in and help deal with the gangs in Haiti. But if you would think about an African country or a South American country coming over to protect the migrants, they would see it as an act of war. So it really goes to see the impact that the Jewish community has on the politics
Agreed.
of the United States and how dominant they can be beyond almost any other country. And it has a lot to do with, the influence of money, the political influence, the influence of media. And I think it's untenable even for us to be trained by the Israeli troops because it presumes a bias that we see them as right and the Arabs is wrong and the Palestinians is wrong. And it helps set the policy for how we defend the Israelis in this fight, the Zionists in this fight, because it's really a Zionist-led war. And at the expense of, the protocols of war. We wouldn't be dealing with, I don't think, anybody else like this if there was not such a dominant influence in Democratic politics and now the Republican politics by some of the Zionists.
Well, Phyllis, where does all this lead us? Because I think there are many layers to this. Of course, you have international influence on a domestic community and on a domestic police force. You've got the militarization of the country. And I can only imagine if one wants to have a peaceful protest in that neighborhood, that could get ugly really fast.
Oh, absolutely right. And that's a very serious threat. I think this is so important from one thing you just said, Santita, the notion of the militarization of the country. A colleague of mine at IPS who works in what we call the National Priorities Project that deals with the question of the federal budget. We've been talking for a long time about the military budget. You've talked about this. Your dad has talked about this. The degree to which the spending, as the U.S. does, of 53 cents of every discretionary federal dollar goes directly to the military and how that distorts the budget. Why there's not enough money for things like schools and jobs and healthcare because so much goes to the military. If you actually make that not just the military itself, meaning the Pentagon and the nuclear weapons arsenal, if you add the militarization of our society, meaning the militarization of the borders, the role of ICE, the provision of weapons of war to local police forces through the Article 1033 of the Pentagon, all of those various internal things that are not part of the military, but speak to the militarization of how immigration is dealt with, how all of these issues are dealt with in this country. We are then spending 62 cents, almost 2/3 of every dollar that Congress gets to allocate is spent on militarization. And that's completely unacceptable. It should be completely unacceptable in this country. It also goes to what Dwight was just saying about the expansion of pro-Israel supporters, which of course includes massive Christian supporters. Just this week in Washington, we're going to see the convention of CUFI, Christians United for Israel, which is probably more powerful economically, especially in the Republican Party, but broadly nationally, than the Jewish sectors of the pro-Israel lobbies. This is a non-denominationally determined position because it's about support for Israel. We saw with Donald Trump how you can be profoundly anti-Semitic and profoundly pro-Israel at the same time, and not that as a competition at all. So it's not about Jews or Jewish influence. It's about the influence of those who support Israel. And what's exciting in a certain way and what's positive about it is that is being challenged in a way that they never have before. So that this movement for Palestinian rights, it's been around for 25 years or more, but is particularly strong right now. And we've seen it in the streets of every country of people demanding a ceasefire. We've seen the uncommitted movement of people voting to say to President Biden, we will not vote for you while you are supporting a genocide. Those are extraordinary indications of how this movement has grown. And the fact that even 3 years ago now, a poll by the Jewish Electoral Institute of US Jews found that 25% of American Jews were saying Israel is an apartheid state. 38% of young Jews said the same thing. So for this new generation, what we might call the justice generation that came of age politically in the summer of 2020 with the protests over the killing of George Floyd, young Jews growing up into that are defining their identity not in the context of Israel, but in the context of supporting Palestinian rights as a racial justice issue. That's how they're defining themselves. It's a set of choices that when I was a young Jew growing up, there wasn't that kind of choice. If you were Jewish, you supported Israel. That was kind of all there was. That's not the case anymore. It's just not the case anymore.
But our young people have shifted, period.
Absolutely.
Because and we keep saying, well, we're fighting for a new world. They're already there, Phyllis Bennis, Attorney Linda Bernard, Dwight McKee. I mean, when I was born, interracial marriages were illegal. Now, these kids, that is not even an issue for them, for so many of them. I'm not saying it's not an issue for some people, but it just, your religion, nobody cares. These kids are down the street. And so when you accuse the encampments of being anti-Semitic and they're being had by young Jewish kids who are saying, wait.
And they're holding the Seder in their encampment as they do.
Yeah, and they're holding these, and they're all going to each other's religious services. And they're very deliberate about that. And then they're being attacked by people who are being hired to, there's a hold on 4 degrees, Phyllis Bennis and Attorney Linda Bernard and Dwight McKee, for these kids who spent $100,000 a year to go to the University of Chicago because they were in the encampments. They graduated, they fulfilled their requirements, but there is a discussion as to whether the University of Chicago will grant them their degrees. So, there's a lot going on. And so I want to know, given what we see happening on the streets, what we're seeing happen in our homes with the police, the implications to me of having, particularly a military force who've been training our police, who racially profile, who've been known to be violent. And mind you, many police all over the world cross the line. Not all of them, but that power happens that way. But the IDF strikes, they have a reputation for being, quite frankly, the best at what they do. And, I'm someone who believes in peace and nonviolence, so I'm not happy about it, but that's what they do. What does it mean in Los Angeles where you had a Rodney King? Where we've had these racial flare-ups and where you've got this tinderbox. And I want to start with you, fellas. I want to ask everybody here, but there is just so much going on to have them, to me, on the streets of LA, even if you can find them into neighborhoods. The neighborhoods bleed. I just think this is very dangerous, Phyllis. And you're almost begging for a confrontation that could be deadly. I'm just going to put it there.
It could be revolutionary
Oh,
because Americans are not gonna stand for it. The first time the IDF, ladies and gentlemen, excuse the expression, Phyllis, it's a colloquial expression, light up the community, shoot people, kill people who are Americans, particularly Black and other Americans. It's again, excuse me, Phyllis, it's going to be on and popping because we're armed. Our communities are armed as well. We may not be militarily trained or be as deadly, perhaps, as the IDF, but we can still kill. They're like every American has like 3 guns. As a matter of fact, they say there was a study years ago, Phyllis said, where Russia was considering an invasion of the United States. And they reached the conclusion that that would not work because Americans as a population are heavily armed. You can't walk into our country like you could Ukraine or any place else in the world and expect that it's just going to be a takeover. That's not happening. If you go to the projects in America or LA or whatever, for every unit, there's at least 3 guns in that unit, and many of them are automatic weapons. So this is a prescription for anarchy, I think, that in a manner that we've not seen heretofore, because we are not going to stand for this. I mean, and they can say they're patrolling the Jewish part of them, but it's still America. And we're just not going to, this is an untenable situation, I think, that is extraordinarily provocative and is, could potentially lead to something similar to like a civil war within California itself. Because we as African Americans are not going to stand for it. I can just tell you ahead of time. And I'm a woman, and I would take up arms against that. You do not have a right to come into our country, our city, and police it in this manner. Now, I understand there's security firms that hire everybody, and they may look for this. Some security firms, as you said, look for ex-military people. Blackwater's one. There are all kinds of them all across the world, and they fight actually in open warfare or protect areas. I understand for example, in Qatar and many cities. What's that other city right there on the water? I can't think of it. Right near Israel, a very, very wealthy Arab community, and they use it's a country, but they use Blackwater and things like that.
Yeah. And these are Americans. We should be clear. These are not Israeli citizens coming here. These are Americans who went to Israel, fought with the IDF, and have come back. So this isn't about an invasion in the sense of others, but it's an invasion by armed forces into our communities.
But I understand that. But to the extent these are IDF people, and you're right, you said that earlier that Americans could volunteer to fight in Israel and be part of the IDF.
Exactly.
It was news to me, thank you for sharing that. But I'm just saying that this isn't going to work, whether they're American or not.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, our mayor, our former mayor, who's now the ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, lost part of his finger serving in the IDF. Because I think his father was part of Irgun, was it? When he fought with Begin as they was fighting to establish Israel in the last century. Dwight McKee, your thought?
Yeah, that is the case. He did lose part of his finger, and he is on call as a officer of the Israeli army. The other risk you run in this is they're the right-wing mercenaries who the reason they believe that they have the right to have guns is that they can subdue any foreign government or any American government that they see as anti-American. And certainly mercenaries coming from another locality, they're going to see that way and they're going to declare war. Many of them are already anti-Semitic, unfortunately, and operate within, the confines of anti-Semitism. So many of them are just looking for an excuse to turn against some of the American citizens and some of the foreign Zionists, uh, and to start, their own counter revolution. So the danger is at 3 or 4 levels.
Well, I mean, Phyllis, where does this put this? How does this impact how we will approach resolving this? What's happening in the Middle East right now? I mean, because
Well, it's very complicated because the role of the United States government is so central. There is right now one person, one single individual in the world who could stop this genocide that is underway in Gaza, and that is President Joe Biden. Not because of the election. I don't talk about elections. I'm not dealing with candidates here. I'm dealing with who's the president for another 4 months, 5 months. And he holds the key. He says that he supports a ceasefire. And he may in his heart of hearts, but that is profoundly irrelevant, what he feels. It's what he's doing that is important. And what he's doing is enabling the genocide by providing virtually unlimited amounts of weapons that make this genocide possible. The Israeli military depends completely on being constantly replenished with new bombs, new drones, new parts for the F-16s, new bullets, new guns, all those things. They don't produce much of that. They produce some things, but not all of it. They are completely dependent on the United States. That's why you saw in this days and days of the Bibi Netanyahu show here in Washington, of him, among other things, taking over our Congress as if he was giving a State of the Union address, addressing his guests in the balcony. It's not the first time. This was the 4th time, but it's shocking every time you see it. But a big part of that was designed to keep him out of jail. This was a get out of jail free card for him.
okay, no. Explain that.
All right, we'll get to that in a minute. Let me
Okay,
just finish from this point.
Indictment.
That is about, he wanted to be sure that the weapons that they want continue to be sent. The Biden administration made a big deal about pausing one small shipment. Well, it wasn't that small. It was to send 1,800 giant bombs, 2,000-pound bombs. One of these bombs can destroy an entire city block, wipe out all the buildings on it, and kill everybody there at the time. One bomb. And they were sending them 1,800 of them, along with 2,500-pound bombs. And they paused that for a couple of weeks. And there was a big brouhaha in Congress saying, how dare you not give Israel everything it wants? And the Biden administration said, okay, we'll give them the 500-pound bombs, but we're going to hold back on these giant bombs, which the U.S. itself claims falsely because of Iraq, where there was the use of these bombs. The U.S. claims it will not use these bombs in civilian areas because of the civilian casualties that are inevitable from them. So far, they are still withholding those. That's great, but Israel doesn't need only that one kind of bomb, and everything else that they need, they are getting in massive amounts. They have gone from getting $3.8 billion of our tax money every year, 20% of their entire military budget, to now this year getting over $17 billion has been allocated. 14 billion has been sent to Israel to buy more weapons. So that's the role of Joe Biden, who could stop those arms transfers today. So all of what he says, when the 7 humanitarian workers from the World Central Kitchen were killed, it was not a coincidence that that was the first time that a large number of people in the Palestinian Gaza Strip were killed, 6 of whom were not Palestinian, were internationals. Only 1 was a Palestinian. But Biden, appropriately, because that was a horrible tragedy, Biden made a big deal of that and talked about how terrible it was. And in that context, the notion of how he described it, he said, I was heartbroken. My heart was broken. I have no doubt that's true. And it's also profoundly irrelevant because 4 hours later, he authorized another shipment of bombs to continue the bombing, to continue the genocide. The point about Netanyahu is facing 4 separate sets of corruption charges. He's been on trial for several years. And unlike this country, in Israel, they have a history when their former prime ministers get arrested and convicted, they go to prison. They actually do time in prison. And he knows that, and he doesn't want that to happen. So he wants this war to continue, because as long as the war continues, he will remain prime minister.
Well, let us be clear. Hold on. I want to establish that, because that's a concept that shakes Americans to the core. Because, of course, we dealt with that in the Supreme Court, right? That, that our presidents have immunity, the heads of our governments.
Right.
You're saying that's not the case.
He has immunity as long as he is prime minister. As soon as he is no longer prime minister, these issues of corruption, he's not being held, except he might be, by the International Criminal Court. He may be indicted by the International Criminal Court by then. But right now, he has been indicted and is on trial for various corruption, basically making deals in return for luxury items for his wife, for massive amounts of money, et cetera, et cetera. Old-fashioned, classic corruption. As soon as he is no longer prime minister, he goes back on trial. The trial will finish. He will be convicted, and he may well go to prison. So he has personal interest in continuing the war, not in a ceasefire, not in bringing home the hostages, but keeping the situation at war. And if people die for him to stay out of jail, he doesn't seem to care.
He benefits from the war. That's what's happening. And he has for a long time, even in terms of his relationship with Hamas. I mean, he has funded Hamas and Hamas's activities in order to keep it on the front burner in terms of the Israeli community, so he could stay in power. All he does every day is get up in the morning, Phyllis, I say, and take me pills. Everything is I. And that's the nature of he's a very dangerous man, I think, a diabolical killer and person. And he does Israel a disservice and Jewish people a disservice by the kind of person he is and the things that he has done in the Middle East. But in terms of what you said about the World Court, as you and I both know, the World Court has no teeth. George Bush was indicted as a war criminal and as an international threat, if you will, and nothing happened. He just couldn't go out. He couldn't go to any country, travel to any country where they might want to arrest him or enforce that warrant. So Netanyahu's the same way. He can go most places in the world. It's not a problem, but he can't go into Western Europe. He can't go into many other places where they honor and obviously respect the World Court. The United States is one of them. Is not one of them.
But you know what I find most galling, Phyllis Bennis and attorney Bernard and Dwight McKee, is that it was reported in the Daily Mail and the Times of Israel that his son has been living in Florida, while you have all of these soldiers who are in peril over in the Middle East, who are dying. And let's be clear, IDF soldiers are getting killed. How does that work? I mean, I guess we would do that here too, but I think that's just so awful.
Florida's the Mecca.
But I'm just saying the fact that I'm saying, why is he not there fighting the fight, Phyllis?
Because he doesn't have to.
Right.
He doesn't have to.
Okay. Like Biden's son.
Sorry.
He didn't have to do anything. I mean, let's face it. The rules don't apply.
Just when I saw that, I just said, oh my gosh, this is and now, and of course, Ariel Gold, who I wanted to have on this morning, she is protesting. Of course, Ariel is. She used to be the co-head of Code Pink, so she'll probably be in jail. Let us raise some funds for her. She'll probably have to be bailed out today, fighting Kufi. She's protesting them today.
Right.
And well, I guess I really what how will this? Where do you see Kamala Harris? Maybe it looks like if the momentum holds, she could become the next president. Do you think that she'll change course?
I think this is a very big question. So far, she has not earned the support of those who said they could never vote for Biden because he is supporting a genocide. She was part of that that administration, and she still is.
And you
She
hold it
has
responsible for that. You do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
She has said certain things that seem to indicate a shift rhetorically, linguistically, away from President Biden. She said, for example, she called for an immediate ceasefire at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday, before Biden ever called for an immediate ceasefire.
But she said for 6 weeks.
But she has not called for a permanent ceasefire.
Right.
At the same time, that was very clear. So it's a linguistic question. It's not so far. We saw that, in fact, ironically, with President Biden himself. We saw him change his language under the pressure of the uncommitted movement, people who in all these states who organized to say, we will not vote for Joe Biden because he's supporting a genocide. And he did change his language. He did start talking about a ceasefire, but he hasn't done yet what is required to make a ceasefire happen. So as of now, Kamala Harris is in that same position. She has given indications that she may feel differently about it, but she has not broken with the administration. She has not called for a permanent ceasefire, and she's not publicly, at least, saying that it is the responsibility of the United States weapons that make this possible, and we have to stop it.
But Phyllis, don't you think that's because she wants the economic support of Jewish people in America and of Jewish people around the world?
Jewish people in America are profoundly divided on this issue. AIPAC is one part of the pro-Israel lobby. This isn't about Jewish money. This is about pro-Israel money, and it's still a lot of money. But they're worried because they know they are losing their youth. They are losing the young people. Mm-hmm. And young people and organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and so many others who know that protection of Jews, like protection of every other community, comes from collective security, from working with other people, from working within and with other comrades and other communities, not from armed guards patrolling places of worship or anything else. So there's that understanding is growing. And I think there is still a bubble in Washington that people believe that supporting Israel is necessary and that criticizing Israel is somehow political suicide. They're not looking at the polls. Among Jews, among non-Jews, among the Black community, among young people, among Democrats. What I mentioned earlier about the question of the Jewish community saying that Israel is an apartheid state, 44% of Democrats, all Democrats across the board in 2022 said Israel is like apartheid. They didn't say it is an apartheid state. They said it's like apartheid. That's profoundly different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
That's true.
And people in Washington, in my city, I think they don't know that. People on the Hill, they don't look at the polls. They look at what their staff prepare for them every morning, which is, a very limited component of that. I think they live in a bubble and think nothing has changed.
Well, how big is the Israel lobby? How big is that lobby in Washington, in your opinion? And
the lobby is very powerful. It's a very powerful lobby. It's not the most powerful. That would go to the military lobby and the pharmaceutical lobby. But it's a very powerful lobby. But it doesn't have. AIPAC used to be able to go to a congressional office and say, "We're going to give you a bunch of money and we're going to deliver the Jewish vote." Well, they can't say that anymore. They don't deliver the Jewish vote. They don't speak for the majority of Jews. They still have money and they're using it. We saw them AIPAC alone spent $20 million to defeat Jamal Bowman in New York, a great new African-American, young, amazing member of Congress. But the fact that it took them $20 million to do that really is a statement about how opinion has changed. That was more money than was ever spent on any congressional any congressional election in this country's history ever.
And they were willing to do it to Rashida Tlaib they offered Hill Harper $20 million to abandon his Senate bid to run against her. But, I want to get some closing thoughts. I only have about 3 minutes left here. And I want to give a couple minutes to you, Phyllis Bennis. Dwight McKee. Well, let me start with you, Linda, and then Dwight McKee, and then you, Phyllis. Linda, your closing thought.
Well, Well, in terms of what we started this kind, first of all, I want to thank Phyllis. I mean, you've just about like manna from heaven. I've learned so much listening to you today. But on the real side, in terms of LA and having the occupational force there, the Israeli, if you will, IDF force there, I'm inalterably opposed to that sentiment. Um, in America, in any American city, not just California, where people seem to be in rarefied air. They think different, do things differently, and everything else. But no, and I think it will create much more angst and problems in LA than they already have, which are substantial. And I don't think it's an appropriate remedy to protecting synagogues or people of the Jewish faith or people of Jewish heritage. It's inappropriate and it should not be permitted.
Dwight McKee, your closing thought in less than a
When
minute?
the Panthers tried to organize a paramilitary organization to protect the rights of people of color,
Right.
they were declared war on by J. Edgar Hoover and Ronald Reagan, and from the inside out destroyed. Many of them were assassinated.
Mm.
At some point, we're going to look at one set of rules for this country. That's what's good for the geese is good for the gander. And for the city council, for them to be talking about funding a paramilitary organization and using public funds to do that is an aberration. And and I think they need to be resisted both through the courts and by protest.
Well, we've been told that we need to study War No More, dedicating the show to Duke Fakir, one of the founding members of the Four Tops. Father was from Bangladesh, mother was of Ethiopian descent, gave us some of the greatest music that we've ever heard. Bernice Reagan from Sweet Honey in the Rock made her transition at the age of 81. Heart just went boom, thud. But these people have lifted us up with their music, and they sang freedom songs, and they gave us the best of us, and they sent it around the world, and I thank God for them today. But we're in a new season, and Phyllis Bennis, we have got what could be a yet another historic presidency. One has to wonder, will it make a difference? Where do you see us going? Or where should we be going?
All of that depends on our movements. This isn't about Kamala Harris alone, the person. That's a big part of it. But the question of how she makes decisions, whether she can earn back the support of people who might have supported her otherwise, but do not want to and are not willing to support a candidate of any sort from any party who is supporting this genocide by the Israeli military against the people of Gaza. She hasn't done it yet, but there's an indication that maybe she wants to. It's going to take some work. She doesn't have a lot of time. But I think that's what we're looking at. We have a movement that is bigger and stronger than ever before. And the degree to which that movement, the movement for Palestinian rights, which now includes the movement for Black lives, anti-war forces, environmental justice forces, the immigrant rights movement, are all engaging in the demand for ceasefire. And ceasefire has changed so that it now requires not only stop the shooting permanently, but it also requires send all the aid that's needed, and that means start funding UNRWA again and stop sending weapons. All of that is required if we're going to have a ceasefire. And that's what our movement needs to keep focused on. We need a stronger movement, a broader and more unified movement, and it will include things like opposing this idea of having armed, unaccountable militias patrolling the streets of Los Angeles or anywhere else in this country. We need to stop the militarization of what's happening in Gaza, and we need to prevent it from happening here.
Well, and I will tell you this for her portion. The vice president's probably getting pressure at home that my brother, who's in Congress, got, because his children told him, if you are, he said, I knew that if I was not an initial signature on this ceasefire bill, I couldn't come home. And my nephew, Noah, looked at him and said, Dad, that's right. And guess what? I think Kamala Harris is facing that same pressure because her stepdaughter, her husband, Mr. Imhoff's daughter, is supporting UNRWA, and she is very, very vocal about it. So don't create, well, no one's monolithic. You have some young Jewish kids who are out here who are fighting for justice. And you have some who are fighting who are reactionary. You have some young Black kids who are fighting for justice. You have some who are reactionary. And we can keep on going down the line. Well, choose this day whom ye will serve. That's what we've been told in our Bible. And Dr. King said, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? We have a choice. And Dwight McKee, I thank you for all the work that you've been doing down through the years. Attorney Linda Bernard, I thank you for the work that you've been doing down through the years. And thank you for making us think, Attorney Bernard and Dwight McKee and Phyllis Menace, even when we disagree. And we've done some of that this morning. That's okay, everybody. Let's just keep talking with each other. Let's keep being together, because that is how we're going to make it. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, we got to go together. Phyllis Menace, New Internationalism Project, Institute for Policy Studies. Let me get off of here so I can call my father and tell him I talked to you this morning. So he will not cavil, and so he'll be very happy that I've stayed on the right track.
Tell him I said hi.
That's what he's going to do. That he adores his Phyllis Menace. He always wants to know if you talk to her before you get on here and say something. So I do follow her writings, but she's brilliant, as is Dwight McKee. Wish you did more writing, Dwight. You too, Attorney Linda Bernard. I love you, everybody. Abraham down there in Brazil, I love you, my sweet.
Shalom.
Much love. God bless you, everybody.
Bye, Dwight. Thanks for everything.
Okay, thank you all.
God bless
Thank you.